this is part of what is known as the Wimbledon 8, is it?
Yeah. I never knew it as the Wimbledon 8. It was always the Wimbledon run to me. It comprised going to lots of pubs as quickly as possible.
Would you do 1 pint in each one of the run? Or?
Yeah, it depended. If you were feeling a bit thirsty, you might do the circuit again. The story goes that my father had a horse in the stables just in front of us here. And he was learning to ride for a film called The Hunting Party. And he decided that he would look for a field for the horse rather than keeping it here. And so, having had a few beers in here, he went across to an estate agent and asked them whether they had a field. And they said that they hadn't, so he came back into the pub, another beer, went back across to the estate agent and said, "Do you have a field maybe with a cottage?" And they said no, they hadn't. No. And he went back over for the third time, by which they were a little bit wiser, and they gave him details of Broome Hall. All 54 bedrooms, 66 acres, 9-acre lake, and it all started out trying to find a field for a horse.
I suppose the horse was very comfortable there.
The horse was quite happy, as indeed were quite a few people.
Yeah.
I would say that probably he was at his height in the early 70s, 74-ish, 73. He'd obviously been through Oliver, he'd been through Women in Love, The Devils, he was into the Musketeers. Probably about that time he was at the height of his game. And there were lots of other films that were great towards his ascension and even afterwards. I mean, I liked Castaway. I thought Castaway was a decent movie. It sort of got passed by. I don't know whether it was his antics that people had become a little bit concerned or frightened of, and that maybe they felt that he'd been a little bit of a has-been, or was too volatile or too dangerous, and they didn't really want to handle him.
It seems to me that actually that his character in Castaway seemed to be very close to what he actually might have been like. And
Gerald Kingsley, yeah.
Yeah, and do you think that's the case?
I think there's a bit of it. I don't think he was as chauvinist as Gerald Kingsley was in Castaway. Physically, I saw an awful lot of him, and I think that it was probably a bit of fun in making it. I think there were a lot of films that were not particularly noteworthy, that were probably done to pay bills rather than for their artistic merit. And then you come across Gladiator. What a swan song. He admired Ridley Scott hugely. He used to call him Wrigley, as in chewing gum. But he admired Ridley hugely, having seen The Duelists many years before. And I actually recorded it at home. And he used to watch this film time and time again. And he just loved the light and just loved the way it looked. I mean, he knew that it was going to be something special. He didn't know what it was going to be, and he certainly didn't know he was going to die. If he had known that, to be able to go, that's going to be the one, that would be a great way to stick two fingers up. But it was a magical film. He had a feeling, I think, that it was going to be big. I don't think he knew how big it would be.
Were you aware of any parts that he was really hankering to play in his life? I mean, we never saw his Hamlet, but do you think he would have...
then that was back on stage, and it was lots of lines. And I mean, certainly, if you look at things like The Devils was very wordy. And sort of in the later years, I think he favoured the parts that didn't have quite as many words. You know the idea?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't recall him having a burning ambition to play anyone in particular. I think he was grateful for the work, and there was a rich variety to it.
So this is Broome Hall?
Broome Hall, yeah. 31 years since I've actually stood here. We were here for just over 10 years, from the 70s to the 80s, and it was a labour of love, labour of lots of money, great folly in many ways. Very important part of my life and a lot of people's lives. We spend a lot of time here, a lot of fun, a lot of laughter, and a whole lot of madness, as you can imagine.
Yes.
Let's go and have a look.
This is the main entry to the house.
Yes, the heart of Broome. Gosh. Memory lane.
So one of the things that was very important to us was the Johnny Carson interview, which was in the early 1970s, which was, for us, I think, the peak of his success, where he went to America, and he was very much the kind of Savile Row-suited English gentleman, but also you get the impression that America didn't really quite know what to make of him.
I think that he was probably one of those types that the more that you had to be well behaved, the funnier it became. And I think there was a little bit of him that was very much on that sort of sod you. You know, if you're going to take, and the Americans were, particularly at that time, they didn't quite get him, and they didn't quite get the English or the British humour. He was a little bit sort of revolutionary, a little bit naughty with them, in order to stir it all up, because they were quite sterile. In the early days, I think that he knew what he was up to. He knew that it was a bit naughty. He would maintain that he gave people what they wanted, that the show was good. He went on to a chat show not really knowing what he was going to talk about. Anyone who goes on to a chat show nowadays knows exactly what they're going to be saying. He needed to cut a niche. He needed to be different. It served him well until it got to a stage where he almost allowed it to run away. If he'd managed it and perhaps kept a little bit of mystery, didn't give them too much of what they wanted. I think he manufactured a bit of it, but at the same time, I think what the camera captured was also an awful lot of him. This is as was. This is literally exactly as it was. Fireplace is exactly the same. The doorway is in exactly the same. It's remarkably emotional, which I didn't think it would be. Wow.
Wow. Yeah, this is a really iconic room, isn't it? That's photo.
It's probably, in terms of my father, probably the most photographed of all the rooms at Broome Hall. And very much as was. This was the heart of Broome Hall, the Ivory. And seat there, seat here, very much as I was. Settee here.
Tiger skin.
Tiger skin, table, fireplace, often roaring. Old swords, bayonets for poking the fire. Same view, obviously. Very much as was. Amazing. And remarkably evocative of the time. Emotional. Really, as I said, I really didn't think it would feel like this, but it does. Wow. I think he was probably the last of a type. I don't think people like that are made anymore. To him, life was a playground, and he didn't take it too seriously. We lived number 1 Homefield Road here.
Yep.
When I was young, I thought that everyone's daddy was on television. There was a very different side to him, which was much more thoughtful.
I'd just be really interested to know what you thought about the play.
What I think it really caught was the essence of the man.
We're not pretending that I am him.
There's only one Ollie Reed.
Absolutely. This is part of what is known as the Wimbledon 8, is it?
Yeah,
Where was it that the helicopter landed?
on this very lawn here. This is literally exactly as it was. Remarkably evocative of the time. I really didn't think it would feel like this, but it does. It's remarkable that 13 years after his death, there's still so much interest about him.